Alright, what's going on everybody? Today we got another video. Today we're going to be doing an ultimate tier list for every champion in Swarm. There are 9 champions that are available to play in the new Swarm mode. And the first one, also the worst champion in Swarm mode that I advise you not to play unless she gets buffs, is going to be Aurora. Aurora is one of the worst champions in Swarm mode because she plays very clunky. Her auto attack is by far one of the worst because I'm not so sure, but for some reason the projectiles do 16 to 32 damage if it crits, but every 3 auto attacks will explode the hex target. But the thing is, other champions can do more damage with just 1 projectile or 1 auto attack, while she has to wait 3 auto attacks to do her explosion damage. By far one of the worst auto attack abilities in the game as of yet. It used to be really good on PvE, where the projectiles would deal a decent amount of damage, but right now they just do no damage and you gotta wait for the 3rd auto attack. I'm not sure how powerful her spirits are, because they do damage and apply hex, and you get a new spirit every 7 levels, so you can kind of infinitely scale. But usually the games you only get to level 35 to 40 if you're lucky. So only get about like 5 spirits to 6, and it's alright. It's just like having another gun, but again, they hex things and you gotta wait every 3rd auto attack to explode that hex. Now, a decent ability she has is her E. Her E makes her go invisible and goes through enemies to damage them, although a little bit risky and doesn't actually last that long. With a decently high cooldown, it is pretty good, but again, it doesn't last that long and it puts you inside the enemies, so if you want to damage them, you have to go inside them, and that's a little bit risky. One of the worst parts of it actually is that it doesn't make you go instantly invulnerable, so there's a cast time on it, and also I think it makes you hop a little bit, which could put you in danger and take damage from enemies while you're casting it, and that's actually really bad for a game like this that is similar to Vampire Survivors. I'm not really fond of this ability because it feels decent but not the best, and for sure I think her ultimate is one of the worst ultimates in the game. I know it bounces you around in the circle and you can knock up enemies and deal a bunch of damage, but there's also a lot of other champions that deal a bunch of damage without going through enemies and potentially getting hit. I know it provides CC. The problem is it's way too clunky and there's a chance you get hit by enemies, especially on extreme mode. So this is one of the worst ultimates in the game. They have to like maybe give you invulnerability or something that will make it more buffed. Yes, I know you can press E and go in your ultimate and then like actually hit enemies while you're traveling as well and make yourself invulnerable, but an ultimate designed around another ability as your E, like most of these champions in this game, don't rely on 2 abilities being up at the same time to actually do something. Yeah, that's why Aurora's bad, because she relies on her E to take no damage and her R being at the same time up to actually make it decently useful in extreme mode. You could be very skilled at this champion, but obviously you might bump into some monsters and take damage, but honestly, she's just really bad. I definitely think she needs a rework or some buffs. If I were to buff her, it'd be 2 of her projectiles and make that actually deal damage, because right now they do 16 to 32 damage and that's probably the worst part of her kit. I also absolutely hate her ultimate cast time. That takes about like 0.5 seconds to 1 second to cast, and it dashes you forward. So it's a little bit clunky because you don't actually know where it will be, and sometimes, you know, it's on your mouse cursor, but it takes a while to get used to her dash range. And yeah, during that dash range you actually can take damage and are kind of stun locked, so more chances for the monsters to actually hit you. And of course, unless you've played this champion a lot, which I don't think a lot of people have, you won't know how big the circle is going to be or where your ultimate is, the walls are going to appear, right? So overall, she is terrible and can't really beat elites that well because of the every 3rd auto cast. But I mean, you can get ability haste. It works. It's just, I mean, if you want to take down elites with your auto attack, it's pretty hard. Let's be honest here. Most other champions can just look at it with their cursor and they'll die. Next up at number 8 is going to be Illaoi. Now, I believe she's really broken on the PvE servers, but right now, as of live, she is definitely very nerfed, and they definitely nerfed a lot of things about her. The reason I think she's bad is because she's kind of sluggish and relies to be playing around her tentacles and staying in one spot. But as you guys know, this game, you have to kind of kite and be kiting always around wherever there's no enemies, and you can get all the mobs in one place so you can do AoE damage on them. The problem with that is she loses DPS, aka damage per second, when she walks away from her tentacles. So it's kind of hard for her to walk around the map and make a new tentacle, especially when Yuumi bot quests come up, or even Bel'Veth. She loses all those tentacles and has to put them in a new place. One thing that's really awful about her is her tentacles can't crit. I think there's a build that a lot of people are saying that she can crit, but I haven't ever seen a crit animation off the tentacles whenever they do damage. So her building not crit is, yeah, it's fine, you can do it without. The problem is a lot of these champions can use crit except for her for some reason. I don't know why, but she won't be doing 200% more damage with it if she ever gets crit. Other than that though, her auto attacks are fine. You know, summons a tentacle. It's really cool concept. I love it. You can get a decent amount of tentacles when they spawn, and it looks really cool. And each tentacle also gives her health regen, which is kind of nice. But unfortunately, sometimes you gotta kite away from the tentacles and it kind of sucks. Her E is good though. It does provide CC and it spawns another tentacle, and it can also crit, which is kind of funny. But other than that, it does have a relatively high cooldown. Even though you can stack 2 charges, you probably want to spam it off CD. And her ultimate is pretty good as well. It spawns a bunch of tentacles. It makes your ability haste relatively low, so you can spawn more tentacles on your auto attack, as well as spamming more E, which is the tentacle knockup. And it's really good for dishing a lot of DPS if you need it, right? Problem is though, again, like I said, she has to kite, and usually these harder levels you want to get away from wherever there's a bunch of minions, right? So yeah, sometimes you can't take it all down, and then you lose DPS. Also, I think duration is one of the worst augments passives in the game, because there's not actually a lot of guns that scale with duration. I know like Tibbers, Yuumi bot, etc. There's a few decent ones, but to be honest, I do think Tibbers is, the AI on it kind of sucks sometimes and doesn't actually do as much as I want it to do, especially when it's evolved. There is one augment that makes her probably really insane, which is called emotional support, which gives all her pets 50% more damage. And yes, her tentacles are pets. So if you get that augment, I think she becomes a relatively beast champion, because her DPS will just go up by 50%. So yeah, maybe she's like higher tier if you get that augment from a Yuumi quest, but otherwise I do think she's relatively sluggish, slow, doesn't have anything that gives her a vulnerability, and yeah, kind of relies on standing in one place and doing nothing. Next up is going to be Leona. Now, in my opinion, I think this champion is actually one of the best champions. If you're low level, you need to catch up with your friends, but otherwise she kind of does have very low DPS, and that's why I'm not really a fan of her. You can build her DPS like damage augments, crit augments, but she kind of does scale with max health and armor. So she's just kind of a very big, tanky, bulky champion. Probably one of the tankiest, right? But like I said, one of the lowest DPSs in the game. In terms of elites, I think in terms of AoE mobs, she actually has a very high AoE DPS. Like, you can go Radiant Field. Her ultimate is insanely huge area size. She's very noob friendly. Unfortunately, when it comes to elites, she doesn't do a lot of DPS. Her auto attack is a bit slow, I would say that. It does actually evolve into something really cool, which gives you bonus damage when your other guns proc it. She also scales with one of the best stats in the game, armor. Armor is insanely OP in this game since it makes you reduce damage from enemies. And her E gives her a shield as well as damage, and then gives her another shield. Like I said, really broken. The AoE on her also insanely OP. Her ultimate is, in my opinion, actually okay. It stuns everyone in a circle, and that's kind of it. It burns them for a bit, but I don't actually think it does that much damage, just the initial solar flare. But it doesn't really help with bosses at all, since bosses can't really be CC'd, so it's kind of whatever. Yeah, it works on elites. And her passive grants area size for every defensive stat. That's why she gets so big and can damage a lot of enemies at a time. And yeah, she has decent range, to be honest. But like I said, she doesn't really have good single target DPS. That's why I kind of rate her a little bit lower for bosses. But by far, I do think she is probably the best tank in this game. She can last a very long time because of her E, especially when you get a bunch of ability haste on her E. That gives her sometimes infinite shielding, which is awesome for getting through the early game. Her early game by far to mid game, late game is awesome. Just against bosses, I think low DPS, which is bad. She's also a very good solo champion, since she can survive, and probably the best champion if you're weak. So if you are weak compared to your friends or compared to the level you're on, I do advise playing her, but again, lowest DPS. Next up is going to be Briar. Now Briar is kind of tanky, kind of like Leona, but does require a little bit of stat checky kind of things. I'd say she's pretty good in terms of like actual damage, more DPS than Leona for sure. Her auto attack also applies a bleed when it's fully evolved, so that's kind of nice. And her damage scales with maximum health, so she becomes fairly tanky a little bit later. The problem is though, I do find with her, is that if you press E and go into like a blood rage mode, well, sometimes you can sit on enemies, but they're also sitting on you and applying damage. And in an extreme, that will deal a lot of damage to you. So sometimes you can't kill them fast enough, and because you're weak or you require base stats to be a little bit higher. And her AoE gets really good, especially once you get a decent amount of area size. It doesn't actually have to go area size, but it kind of looks cool and you get a lot of AoE damage. Her R also is very nice as it gives a lot of lifesteal, and if you're in a pinch you can just activate it, get back to full health. The only problem I have with her is that, you know, it does put you in a frenzy mode and you can't really control your character unless you get out of frenzy mode. But after your frenzy mode is out, you don't really have a lot of DPS and you're kind of just running around in a circle waiting for it to come back up. So that's why I don't really like her too much. You can actually obviously still kite with your melee attack, but like I said, sometimes you can't even tank some of the monsters because you're a little bit too weak. And yeah, she can come off sometimes fairly weak, but I mean, she does have more DPS than a Leona on a boss, and sometimes she can tank it if she's strong enough. But obviously these bosses in extreme, if you're sitting on them, well, sometimes you don't lifesteal enough and you'll be taking a lot of damage. Her E gives you 25% damage reduction, but the thing is, you gotta kite in this game. Standing still is not really a good strategy. If she had to stand still and that's all she did, well, guess what? She'd be a really OP champion, so they'd have to nerf her, and that's what they eventually did on PvE. And now she is kind of a, yeah, she does quite a bit of damage, to be honest. Especially her passive, giving her up to 60% more damage as well as 100% movement speed. So if you're really good at utilizing being low health while actually surviving, you can be a decent champion. It can be a little bit risky, but high risk, high reward, and that's why she's kind of up here. Definitely better than Leona in terms of DPS, but maybe not survivability. Leona takes the #1 spot. At number 5 is going to be Jinx. Jinx, I think, is actually in a good spot. On the beta servers, they made her really weak, but they actually gave her a lot of decent buffs, and she feels actually pretty good right now. One thing I don't really like too much is sometimes if you get too much movement speed, she can be a little bit hard to control. And even though you have a lot of movement speed, the problem is you don't have enough damage, even though she's a damage carry. So that's why, yeah, sometimes going movement speed augments as well as Yumi quest augments makes her super fast, but she can be lacking some damage to clear waves, right? So in terms of like gold farming, she can be good with the movement speed, but if you get that movement speed augment where she gets a lot of damage based on her movement speed, that can make her really good if you can get that combo. Also, I think she might be better than actually number 5 because her ability cooldowns actually become relatively low if you can get enough ability haste, as well as her passive activating, giving her 150 ability haste when you kill 60 minions. She does actually feel really nice, especially with you get the Annihilator Jinx. Oh, like that Annihilator cooldown will be very low. And I do think she actually has one of the most highest DPSs for elites. Her Pow Pow minigun will do a lot of damage, and eventually it'll pierce, right? But her early game is one of the worst, as she doesn't really have a lot of AoE with her auto attack. It can only hit one target at a time, so you have to rely on other guns for the early game until she gets it evolved. That's when it can start piercing and doing a bunch of damage. Her E, on the other hand, actually is insanely kind of good. It's like a shotgun, so you can actually deal multiple damage to an elite if you're very close up, and yeah, it's on a low cooldown. It's on a very low cooldown, especially if you're in your passive and getting excited or have a lot of ability haste. And her ultimate is just true damage. It does like a big AoE damage on a fairly low cooldown as well, so clearing out mobs if you need it with her R, very nice. And again, she has a lot of synergy with the best augments in the game and has good synergy with a decent amount of Yumi quest augments as well, right? I'm pretty sure if you hit the right augments on her, she becomes an insanely OP late game champion. But I do find her early game a bit weak, her mid game a bit weak until you get something evolved, then she becomes online. Otherwise, I do think there are better carries than her because she doesn't really have any defensive stuff, only damage. Next up at number 4 is going to be Seraphine. Seraphine is by far a very nice utility champion, as she is also good in 4 stacks because she gives a shield to everyone. And if you get enough ability haste, that gives, you know, more shields to everyone, right? As well as movement speed, so you can kite a little bit better. Her passive to have a chance to give double projectiles also makes some guns really OP on her. It's only 25% chance you might get it. So it used to be 33% on the beta servers, but they kind of nerfed it because I guess she was actually OP. Makes a lot of fun augments and guns on her. So definitely want to try a full projectile Seraphine build one day, but I haven't got it recently. And obviously her ultimate is an AoE invulnerability, huge AoE by the way, so if you're doing the vase quest you can just press that button and instantly complete it. But the best part of it is it stuns everyone on the map for like 3 seconds compared to like a Leona, which is 1.5, as well as doing a decent amount of damage, not too much, but the fact is it's a huge AoE, so it helps your whole team. And then the best part, invulnerability for your whole team. So in my opinion, I do think very, very, very good. Though I do feel her auto attack is kind of more utility. I know it slows them, and yeah, it is kind of AoE-ish, but it doesn't actually have a lot of damage in her auto attack. It's kind of sluggish. I'm not really too fond of it because I know how much damage it does, but hopefully you rely on your other guns and maybe they make up for it. But yeah, I think she's okay. Just because I don't think her auto attack is as good, but like I said, everything else, she's a support champion. She's very utility wise, and she can maybe get a decent amount of DPS later just because of a chance to doubling every projectile, right? Just because I don't think her auto attack is as good and not rely on her auto attack gun. At number 3 is going to be Riven. Now this champion, oh my god, this champion I think is like broken, especially if you're very stat checky, but she feels very weak without those stats. The problem with her, in fact, she, like I said, OP, and once she gets online, she runs around the map collecting everything, smashing everything. It gets really broken. Her auto attack eventually, when it's involved, does apply a CC and knocks everything up, right? It's kind of like a mini Leona ulti every 3 auto attacks. So obviously that's broken. And the fact that her auto attack doesn't scale with ability haste, it scales more with movement speed, makes it so that you can take augments that reduce your ability haste but increase your damage. Like heavy hitter, I think that's one of them. Second, the fact that she doesn't actually have to go ability haste to deal more damage with her auto attack, makes it so she can go other things such as armor or, you know, damage, crit chance, etc. So she doesn't actually have to go abilities to increase her damage. She can go other things. Her E also gives a dash as well as applying another auto attack if you haven't auto attacked recently, and has an instant invulnerability animation in it, so you can actually go invulnerable for like a very millisecond and dodge a few spells and stuns everyone around you. So get a nice shield when you press E. And her R, I mean, hey, we know you activate it, you get the wind slashes, you become super fast, you run around the map like crazy and deal a bunch of damage. And obviously the most broken thing about her is her passive, giving her 15 to 25%, actually I think it's a 15% more damage how close they are, and you gain a 25% shield for how much damage you do. So that's why she gets extremely broken, because she gains a shield for damage she does, and that's not her passive, that's not her like Q, her bunny hop. That's every single gun gives her a shield. So that's why you'll have at one point, especially on bosses, an infinite shield where you can't die. Now obviously the problem is if you're not like strong enough, then you can't do all this, and she becomes a little hard to control in the early game. Like her early game's a little bit weak because she's a melee champion that has to dash into people. If you are good enough, you can dash into them and then walk away and kind of be good at microing your champion, but otherwise it's where mid game and her late game shines. On bosses though, she can be a little bit harder. She's a little bit weaker because if she's not strong enough, she kind of gets one shot or like tapped by the enemy boss if you're stuck inside them. But usually if you're strong enough, you can tank their damage, and it's where mid game and her late game shines. On bosses though, very chicken headlessly and just be a tank as well as a high DPS champion. If you get cross country on her, she does become probably the most broken champion in this game, especially early. If you get a mid game, it's all right, but obviously third augment, I wouldn't get it as a third Yumi augment. But I would say her DPS on elites isn't as high as the next two people that we're going to be talking about. That's why I kind of listed her less. She is a very good solo champion and 1v9 carry in four player modes, but her damage on single target bosses is less than the next two champions. So number 2 is going to be Xayah. Xayah, probably the highest DPS on single targets because of the way she works. So her feathers, her early game, I think is kind of whatever. It kind of sucks, to be honest, and she doesn't have a lot of AoE damage until she gets, you know, she gets her passive, her weapons, all of that stuff. It throws a feather, okay, cool, but the big point is her E. Her E pulls the feathers towards her, and each feather does a very high amount of damage. And on the ground, if you stack like 50 or 100 feathers on the ground and you pull them on an elite, you can deal like 50,000 damage and one-shot elites. So essentially, she is very broken with power up. Like her single target on elites, probably the highest in the game. I think she's the highest. One thing that does suck about her is she does have to go pick up radius because of her auto attack is evolving from that passive. And I think pick up radius is kind of whatever, since you do get it from upgrades, and so you don't really need it, but it's okay. Since her passive will deal damage for everything that she picks up, enemies do get hit by it, though I don't know how much damage it actually does because I don't really pay attention to it. That's kind of nice. Her ultimate also summons a bunch of feathers around her, gives her an invulnerability animation, and resets her E cooldown so you can pull more feathers. So it's kind of nice to kite away from people, but I do think it is more of an escape tool rather than an ultimate, which is all right with her since she has an OPE ability, right? Also, when she picks up enough things, I think it's about 200 items on the ground, she gets 80 ability haste and can throw more feathers, so that's kind of awesome as well. But like I said, the only things I don't like about her is her early game. She does feel a little bit weak early game, but of course once you get rolling, hey, nothing matters, you can kill everything on sight. Very broken champion. Late game, mid game I think is all right, but her early game is her weakest point. And finally at number 1 is going to be Yasuo. Now Yasuo is the most broken champion, especially for solo carry as well as late game Xayah takes the number 1 spot for late game DPS, I think, but Yasuo has a lot of mobility and survivability. For instance, his E has 3 charges and it gives an invulnerable animation. So you can E through a lot of things and take no damage. It gives you a shield and you have 3 charges of it. That's really broken if you need to maneuver yourself to a new place. I value invulnerability over a lot of other things. So if a champion has a lot of invulnerable utility kind of abilities, then he's going to be really OP. And his wind wall is very nice utility as it blocks people from going through it, as well as projectiles. That one part I don't really care about, but blocking people and then making them stack all up into one place makes him be able to cut them down if he has evolved tornadoes or whatever guns he has. It's just, you know, it stalls out the game, so that's really nice for him. And also if he moves more, he can throw more tornadoes, so that's kind of nice. So you can get movement speed on him. I think the most other broken part about him is his passive. He gets natural crit chance, so you don't even have to build crit on him. Well, I mean you do, but what I'm saying is he gets more crit than other champions in the game, so he's going to be somewhere around 90 to 100% crit, and that's why he has insanely high damage. So not only will his tornadoes crit, his other guns will crit. You can go a very high crit DPS build. I mean, you want guns that say they can crit, and we all know evolved tornadoes, when they're evolved, they come back so they can do more damage, and his auto attack is probably one of the best in the game. Unfortunately, I'd say his single target DPS is not as high as Xayah because of the feather pull, but he still has the crit and other guns can do that for him, and his tornadoes do a bunch of damage anyways. So at one point he just becomes a slaughter machine. Big point though, he has 3 dashes and all of them give him vulnerability as though as a way to maneuver from mobs if you're in a bad position. By far solo carry, can get us sticky situations. His early game though a bit slow, is very weak because he needs a little bit of time to ramp up and get all of his power-ups. And yeah, that's it for this tier list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Enjoy your swarm while it's out, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.